Hi folks, Dick Fairburn here. I've been talking about marksmanship in my last couple videos. Grip, which is important. Stance, which is important. Probably the single most important aspect of good marksmanship is trigger control. You can have a lousy grip, you can have a semi-unstable stance, but if your trigger control is spot on, you're probably going to get the hits where you need them. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to go back into the basement where it's cooler and more comfortable. And we'll talk about revolvers, that long steady double action pull, and a couple different kinds of striker pistols. The Glock, the plastic frame striker that most of us are using in one fashion or another, Smith & Wesson, Springfield Armory, Glock, several of them. How to control that trigger. And then another pistol that's really kind of a hybrid between them, and it's very small to carry. It's sort of my backup gun, but it's got a trigger that's kind of a combination. It's a polymer and it's a striker, but it has a trigger more like a double action revolver. It's very controllable. So we're going to talk about some good points, bad points of these. If you want to learn about trigger control, stick around. Okay, I'm out of the heat and humidity of an Illinois summer. We're going to talk about trigger control. Stance is something you're going to use in training, and the more you do it consistently in training, the more likely you are to hold that stance under the stress of a gunfight. Same way with your grip. The more you use the grip that works for you consistently in training, especially stressful training, if you can do that under time pressure or simulation scenarios, the more likely you are to have that grip during a gunfight. Trigger control is in many ways is a fine motor skill, and we know that under high stress conditions, fine motor skills are tough to keep intact. So the more practice you have, and the more practice you have under stressful conditions, the more likely you are to have good trigger control. But certain weapons have better triggers than others. But by means of a definition, what do I mean when I say trigger control? What I mean is we get a good, clean trigger break without disturbing our sight alignment or where the sights are on the target any more than possible. So we get a good sight alignment, a good sight on target, point of aim, and we can break that shot without moving those sights any more than we have to. Now, they're never going to be rock solid. Especially when you use lasers or if you use red dots, you notice those things wander around quite a lot more than you think you have little micro movements. So they're going to move. The point is no more movement than we have to, and that's a good trigger break. I'm going to show you several different types. We'll start right here. This is the 1911. This is my favorite pistol. I use them in all sizes from 5-inch Commanders down to the little Kimber Micro 9. That's a very handy little pocket pistol. It's a single action type trigger. In other words, the trigger is going to be the same every single time you pull the trigger. I do not have a conventional double action switching to single action semi-auto pistol because a number of years ago I found I couldn't master them. For about a year or so I carried a Beretta 92F when they first were adopted by the military as the M9. Our department got them. I simply could not master that changing trigger pull. And you see so few of them being used by either law enforcement or concealed carry folks nowadays. That's why, because they were always difficult to master. And really, the only reason they existed is because this kind of semi-automatic had to be carried cocked and locked. Hammer cocked, safety locked. That's the most effective way to carry it. But a lot of people were really frightened by someone walking around with a cocked pistol. So Jeff Cooper called that whole double action semi-auto pistol kind of an ingenious solution to a non-existent problem. Once you understand guns enough to know why this is going to be carried in this fashion, it isn't a problem. An old story one time, a federal agent told me, he said that he was somewhere where his pistol was exposed during the course of an investigation, no threat, people standing around. And he said at one point some lady come up to him and he said, "Excuse me, sir, do you realize that your pistol is cocked?" And he said, carrying a 1911, he said, "Yes, ma'am, I know that." She said, "Isn't that dangerous?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am, it is. It's dangerous, but it's under control, and it's really the safest way to carry these pistols." One of the main popularities of this kind of pistol, not only because it handles major caliber cartridges, is the trigger. These can be given a glass breaking, crisp 3.5 to 4.5 pound trigger that never changes. You will get the least sight movement of almost any pistol you're going to try to master when you've got that type of a single action trigger pull. Generally it's a 1911. The P35 or the Browning High Power, one of Browning's last pistol designs, has resurged here of late. Several manufacturers are making the 9mm high power again. The high powers are kind of notorious for not having a good trigger pull the way they come, but they can be given one by a good gunsmith, just as good as a 1911 pattern pistol. So it's a pistol that's again viable for serious use. And like 1911s, they come in all types, generally pretty basic, so you're probably going to need a little custom work on them. The most common pistol we see nowadays is a striker-fired gun. Polymer frame, striker-fired, Glock being the #1 example. Glock has the lion's share of the market, but there are SIGs, there are Springfield Armories, there are Smith & Wessons, there are all types of striker-fired, plastic-framed, polymer-framed pistols out there. They have, in my opinion, one of the lousiest triggers yet put on a pistol. I'm not saying you can't master them, you can shoot them very, very well, but they just don't lend themselves to easy learning curve. In training lots and lots of young police officers firing these Glocks, we saw more trigger control problems than any other pistol I'm familiar with. And when it comes to your grip, to your stance, and to the trigger control, grip and stance are pretty easy to learn, and on training range you're going to master them pretty well, pretty quickly. Trigger control is why you're not getting the hits where you want them. And I would say 90% of the correction that range officers have to do with people is to coach them into good trigger control. Typically with a right-handed shooter, especially on a Glock, a lot of people call Glocks, left shooters. If you are kind of snatching the trigger at the end instead of a good clean break, you're kind of anticipating recoil and jerking that last little bit, you will tend to pull your shots a little left and low for a right-handed shooter. Right and low for a left-handed shooter. And we tend to see those rounds drifting that. When I'm out of practice, especially out of practice with a striker-fired gun, I will tend to go a little low and left until I remember to try to get a handle on that trigger pull. There's a fair amount of movement. There is not really a firm spot where it takes up. It's just kind of mushy. But it goes bang, and they're very reliable, and you can master them. Anyone can. I'll talk about reset as we go along, but I really didn't hear much about reset until the Glocks came on the market. It just wasn't a thing we talked about in firearms training, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Another example of a polymer frame striker-fired pistol. This is a Springfield Armory XDS. Very similar. Fair amount of take-up. Kind of a little bit more of a firm platform when you get the trigger loaded with this pistol. And in my opinion, a little bit better of a crisp break than a Glock. Take up, nice firm wall, takes a little movement with all of these pieces. It's not a clean break. There's some creep before you get there, but then it will break. Here's the oddball out. This is a car. I've had a couple of these over the years, and this is their smallest one. This is the CM9. This is a really nice little ankle or pocket gun, backup gun for police officers. They have a very unique trigger system. They're polymer framed, they're striker fired, but instead of that take up and then a wall and then a kind of a mushy, crisp take, this has a long, very smooth, very steady pull until it breaks. It's really a semi-automatic version of a double action revolver. The handgun that I have seen the least problems on with shooters snatching that trigger, pulling them low left, the best was always a double action revolver. And I think it's that long, steady build-up. And it's not really a build-up, it's kind of a level pressure. Long, smooth, steady break allows you to kind of get into a rhythm of keeping those sights on target, getting that surprise break. I say a surprise. If you're good, you should be able to will that pistol to go off at a moment's notice. So it's not truly a surprise. But to work that trigger, keep the sights online, and get that clean trigger break without moving the sights, I think is easier with something like a car semi-auto or a double action revolver than anything. When I had a young recruit who was having a lot of problems with a Glock, one of the ways I coached them out of them was to put the Glock on the counter, and I would give them a 38 caliber double action revolver, not a snub nose like this, normally a 4-inch, and light 38 wad cutter loads. So I would kind of familiarize them with the revolver, let them dry fire that trigger a number of times. Long, steady pull. Long, steady pull. This is a Colt. Colts have a tendency, older Colts especially, have a tendency to kind of stack up a little bit. They get just a little bit heavier as that trigger pull develops. A good gunsmith can correct that. The Smith & Wesson is a very smooth, steady pull, much like the car. But that long pull, that long, steady, smooth pull, within 50 rounds of wad cutters fired through a 38 revolver, I usually had their trigger control fixed. So then we put the revolver away and we did 50 or 100 rounds of slow, careful build up to more speed with their Glock striker fired trigger. And a lot of times that snatching the trigger was fixed. So a revolver, and you know, people, I've seen people on the range, they'll pick up that car, it's really small, it's really light, they go, wow, that's a really long trigger pull, it takes too long to get there. Okay, the fact that it's long doesn't necessarily mean that it's slow. You can fire them almost as fast as anything else with practice. And some of the speed records that you've seen, you know, Jerry Micklick set with double action revolvers, 6 rounds in, you know, just fractions of a second practically. You can train yourself to be extraordinarily fast with that long, heavy double action trigger pull. And to me, it's more forgiving and it's just kind of easier to master. Okay? A thing I want to talk about is with Glocks. It's a big fad now to accessorize your Glock. This is like a Barbie doll. It's like the AR-15 of the pistol world. We can customize it, we can accessorize it in an infinite number of ways. And what a lot of people do, a lot of police officers try to get away with this, is they immediately try to pull out the Glock trigger system and put in something that's better. And I said, to me, the XDS seems to have more of a firm wall. Okay? I don't get a firm feeling when this trigger is set and it's about to release. It's just kind of mushy. To me, the Springfield Armory is a little bit better, and various models of the Springfield Armory vary a little bit. The SIG 320 is again a different feeling kind of striker thing. But the question comes up, should I get the Glock trigger parts out? Should I get an aftermarket one? Should I drop a couple $100 more in specialized parts? If you're a competitor and you think it makes a difference for your competitive gun, that's a good idea. If it makes you happy, it makes you feel like you're going to perform better, then do that. To carry as a concealed pistol or as a police officer with a duty gun, I think it's probably a bad idea. If you shoot someone and there becomes an issue in court, and the attorneys on the opposing side are there to make you look as bad as possible. So they're going to ask you, why did you change the trigger? Oh, it's a lighter trigger, or I shoot better, I'm more accurate, so you're more deadly. They're going to try to turn that against you. So the more stock your pistol is, I think from a legal point of view, if you use it in a deadly force encounter, it's easier to explain. Now, there are some exceptions to that. If you carry a double action revolver, they're better now than they used to be back 30, 40 years ago, but they can be pretty heavy and pretty long to deal with. A good gunsmith can smooth them up. They can lighten that pull to some extent. It's not a hair trigger that you're going to hear that thrown against you in court. It's just smoothing up and polishing and making you more effective with that revolver. I think you can sell that one pretty well. A lot of 1911s don't come super refined from the factory. So an action job to smooth them up and make them more reliable, a trigger job to get them in that roughly 4.5 pound clean break trigger range is not unreasonable at all. Now, if you have it tuned down with all titanium parts and everything you can to get it as light as possible, which is okay for competition, but not a good idea for carry, then the first problem you might have is you may get a negligent discharge. You may get a shot fired that you didn't intend to fire. If you do, then you're going to have to answer for that light hair trigger when you go to court. Okay? The lawyers are there to try to make you look as bad as possible. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of trigger is reset. And I said I had never really heard people even talking about trigger reset until the Glock took over the lion's share of the market. And this is me. This is not every instructor. I know some really good instructors who I respect a great deal who focus on reset. I think it's a fool's errand myself. We cannot maintain super fine motor skills under high stress situations. And I cannot think of a finer motor skill than trying to catch what one guy says, he calls it catching the link. I fire. When I release this trigger, you're going to get a small click. When I reset it. At that point, this trigger will fire again. There's the click. That click in a striker-fired pistol, and even in a 1911, that means I can now pull the trigger again. I'm at the wall. I don't have any take-up. Click. Now watch how much more movement there is. Almost a half inch farther forward before the trigger is completely free. So I have to take that back up to get to the wall and get that trigger break. If you are training yourself to reset in this fashion, where you fire, you kind of pin that trigger back, and then you listen for the click, you are slowing yourself down immeasurably. And the whole idea of using trigger reset is for you to be able to get follow-up shots much quicker. You don't have to move your finger as far. You're already at the wall where it's going to break. That's the whole idea of reset. But if you wait until you can move it and hear the click, you've already lost. You have to build the ability to have that trigger at the reset point while it's cycling in a new round. So you don't have to wait for the click. You're already there. That's trigger reset. That's fast follow-up shots. How important is that? Competitively? Maybe. But I'll tell you what, I know a couple of top competitors that will tell you, and these are people who shoot 40, 50, 60,000 rounds a year. They will tell you that they have trouble mastering trigger reset on striker-fired pistols. So if we're talking the average cop who, after his initial training program, may shoot 200 rounds a year, the average concealed carry holder who probably doesn't shoot a whole lot more than that, even though they should, both of them should, how are they going to master that little fine motor skill of having that trigger, you break it, you're going to move it forward to just the right place to catch the link and be ready for a super fast follow-up shot? I think it's tough. It's tough for me to do. I shoot more than the average person, but certainly not nearly as much as Robbie Leatham or some of those, top-level competitors. I think training for a consistent trigger pull is a better way to go. Okay, so that might mean all the way back, all the way forward, including the take-up on every shot. You can move a half an inch really, really fast. Okay? Probably as fast as you can keep the sights lined up. So trigger reset, I think, is grossly overdone. And for people who don't shoot a lot of rounds a year, they don't have the consistent skills to deal with that every time. Here again, pull. Now while it's cycling, I need to move that trigger just a little bit farther forward so I'm at that wall ready to go. That's an incredibly minute amount of movement. And you got to do that thousands of times to really develop the skill to do that reliably. I think trigger reset is overblown. With a revolver, double action revolver, and a lot of people still carry these, if you go to the click, you've locked the revolver. The first click will not allow that trigger to pull, the hammer or cylinder to move. Okay? Smith & Wessons can do that as well. When we tested pistols at the Illinois State Police, we were testing double action only against some Stryker guns. Smith & Wesson had a double action only 40 caliber pistol at the time, and there were actually two places in that release that if you only went to the first, locks up, I'm pulling hard, or the second with that pistol, there was a second click, both of those locked the trigger action. And we had a lot of complaints. They thought the guns were breaking. It was a malfunction. We got pretty familiar with them. We said, no, there's only one way to shoot this pistol effectively. That's all the way back, all the way forward, release it completely, and then start your cycle over. So every trigger is, every brand, every model can be different. Learn how to master your trigger. Do you have to have that machine gun, bum, rapid fire in a gunfight situation? No, not really. We're talking, a second or two difference in firing 1, 2, 3 using trigger reset as opposed to all the way back, all the way off. There's not that much time difference. It gives you a little bit more time to get the sights back where you want them on the point of aim. If you can work it, if you can live and master trigger reset, then God bless you. I'm just telling you that most people just think they can. And when you really put them under stress, it's a pretty hard skill to stick with. So that's trigger control. Grip, stance, trigger control. It's the three elements of marksmanship. I haven't talked about sight alignment because I think that's pretty obvious. Whatever kind of sights you have, level, equal distance on the sides. Try to keep them as tight together as you can. Having your sights locked together is more important than where you put them on the target. Because if you drift a couple inches left with a good sight alignment, you're going to be a couple inches left. But even if you're in the middle, but your sights are out of line all the way to the left or all the way to the right, that angular thing is going to add up. It's going to cause you more problems. See? So master your trigger. Work on your grip and stance. Do it as many times as you can. Dry fire is wonderful. Virtually any modern pistol can be dry fired, including most rimfire semi-automatics. So dry fire as much as you can. That's a great way to get used to that trigger. It's a great way to master it. Practice your grip, practice your stance. That's marksmanship. Now, here's the sad thing that I say. And if you go back and look at the videos where I talk about my Building a Better Gunfighter book, marksmanship is probably the least important aspect of winning a gunfight. The most important aspect is training this. You've got to get mentally ready. You've got to be willing to step over that line and use deadly force against another human being. And the time to make that decision is not when you're looking at a bad guy with a knife who's trying to mug you on the street. The time to make that decision is now. I've got a video on Jeff Cooper's color code. The whole point to the color code was to help you build up to that level where you're ready to deliver deadly force when it's appropriate. So think about mindset, think about marksmanship. It's all kind of complicated in sound, but we can make it simple and you can become very effective at it. So thanks for watching in. Everybody stay safe out there. I'd like to take a little time to do a little business. First of all, shameless plug for my book, my second book, Building a Better Gunfighter. I have a number of these in paper copy. They are still available on either eBay or on my website at dickfairburn.com. The first book, Police Rifles, is no longer in print, but both of these will soon be out in an ebook format, so you can pick them up that way. I would also like to ask you to please subscribe, ring the little notification bell, and if you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up. That's what helps grow this channel. That's what helps develop more content for you that are interested in what I want to do. So I appreciate it if you could buy the book, if you can subscribe, ring the bell, and give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.